Okay, so I've got this plan view set up showing a fairly rudimentary interior, but it's enough to start setting up my rendered interior perspectives. And so I've made one previously, but I'm going to make a new camera view just so that I can go over that process again. And so you have on the quick access toolbar the little down arrow next to the house icon where you can choose camera. Or you can always go to the view tab and then you'll see the larger 3D view button where you can choose camera as well. And so it's usually best to do it in a plan view. So I've got the plan view open, and then if I choose camera, then I just need to place the camera where I want to be viewing from, and I might start with a one-point perspective, so I'm going to just in the sort of top section there, place it in the middle of the room, and then take it so it's looking straight across to the right, which will give me basically something like a one-point perspective. And notice I'm taking the camera a fair way from the target, a fair way from the camera before I place that second point. If you place it too close, it's going to crop out things in the distance. So I'm taking it further away so that I include the whole building in this view. Don't need to go all the way to the back. It'll still pick up things that are a little bit beyond the target, but if I do it here, it would definitely take out the back wall there. So I'm just going to take it a fair distance from the camera. And I can still modify things if necessary. So if I select that screen there, I might decide that that can be lower. So by selecting it, I can still modify some of the properties. You can't do everything in perspective, but I can definitely type in a different height. That's just a wall, but here this reception counter was done with extrusions. So I've got some extrusions on the side and then some more in the middle for the cabinets. So if I zoom out here, it's going to zoom the whole view. So it's making the whole thing bigger and smaller using the wheel on the mouse. But then if I click onto the border and drag the edges, that's going to change the field of view, which means it's like zooming, but it's actually widening my view cone so that I can see more. So you've got those two things, zooming to make the whole view bigger and smaller, and then increasing that field of view so that you can see more. And so that's already a basic view setup. And you can see then that I've got a ceiling already placed there, which will be important in a moment. But for now, I'm going to try rendering with just the sunlight. So I'm going to click on the shadows button down on the view control bar, and you can see then that the whole thing's in shadow. So if we go back to the plan view, and we'll just spend a bit of time looking at how Revit works out which way is north. And yep. Yes, yeah, that's right. So that's okay. You can always come back and add the ceiling afterwards. You can set it up, and then the beauty of Revit is that you can modify things, and then it updates all of the views. So that's fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. Yeah, if you could build a glass, if there was such a thing as a glass ceiling, which in some metaphorically, but not real. So the glass roof, if you want to make a real thing, but yeah, I don't. So so the sun is going to come from, well, which way does the sun come from in Southern Hemisphere? I'm sure you all know. Yeah, it kind of rises in the east, but generally which direction does it come from in the Southern Hemisphere? Yeah, what's the general direction the sun's coming from overall throughout the day? North. So in the Northern Hemisphere it comes from the south, Southern Hemisphere of course comes from the north. It definitely rises in the east, sets in the west, And then in summer, it's funny, it actually rises southeast. In winter, it rises northeast. And so that changes throughout the year. And it's good to have some knowledge of that. And so here in Revit, if we don't change the north direction, later on I'll spend some time and work out which way north really is in relation to this building. So we can do that. You can tell Revit exactly which way north is. But I'm just going to leave it with the default direction, which is the way it is on a map. So which way is north on a map usually? Up. 90 degrees. Yeah, 90 degrees. That's right, vertical. Okay, so that's the default direction. So in plan here, the direction that all of these reference plane is pointing. Yeah, well, that's it. So, yeah, well, I've seen there are some people who try to say that we should be doing things the other way, but yeah. So anyhow, yeah, the deep north. But if you look at the plan here, we know north is this way. So then I'm not going to get any sun in the morning because sun's going to rise in the east over here. But in the afternoon, I should get quite a bit of sun coming in through the windows there. So now I need to find my perspective view again. Going back down through the views, you can see that I've got these views, 3D view 1 and 3D view 2. When you don't name a view, a camera view that is, it'll give it a name like this. So 3D view 2 is the most recent camera view I've made. And if I was to make another one, of course, that'd be 3D view 3. And it's a really good idea to rename them as you go. Otherwise, you'll end up, I've seen people with literally hundreds of 3D views, and even then they still don't rename them, and they keep navigating through and trying to guess, you know, whether it was 3D view 49 or 3D view 84 that they wanted to go and render again. So give them a name, and so I'm just going to call this interior reception 1. Okay, so now I want to see the sunlight in this view. So it's really helpful to have the shadows turned on so that when you go to adjust the sun settings, and this is one of those things that's a little bit hard to find, so you probably just want to have a look at this. So it's on the sun button, but you need to go to the top option there, sun settings, while you're in the perspective view. Okay, so don't worry about the sun path button on and off. You won't need to use those. But sun settings is really important. So clicking on that sun icon and then going to sun settings. And then I'm going to go to still and then just click apply. So it's funny, it's detected that we're in Canberra. Usually it's pretty good at guessing where you are, but they must have done, it uses the IP address, and we're probably going through some strange server, and it could actually be going through Canberra. So I'm going to hit browse there. Not that Canberra's going to have very different sun to Sydney, but you can change it. Yeah, if yours has Sydney, just you can just leave it on that. So you can use the map here if it's coming up, and if it still won't pick it, it should, but otherwise you can just go to default city list and then choose Sydney from the list. You usually won't have to do this, it'll detect where you are. That's right, you can design for anywhere, and yeah, well that's what we're going to look at. So the winter sun is often better for interiors because it's going to be at more of an angle than summer sun. So summer sun's steeper, winter sun is, well, more of an angle relative to vertical, less of an angle relative to horizontal. So I'm going to go to, let's go to winter. So June, July. Yep, and then I'm going to set the time a bit earlier in the day. So I'm going to go for, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Apply. And then you can see now my sun coming in maybe the way you would expect it from that window behind. Now, if we go later in the year, the sun will be at less of an angle relative to the horizon, but it'll come around more to the west, because as you get closer to summer, it goes more true west in spring, and then it actually goes a little bit south of that. So it has a wider arc of travel in summer than it does in winter. So you can get sun later in the day, essentially. So I can go to 5 o'clock, and that way I might get more sun into the space. And that's really what you're trying to achieve here, as much natural lighting as possible. Yeah, so that means you're not getting sun. Oh, do you have shadows on? Yeah, you need shadows on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can't tell if you don't have the shadows on. Yeah, so then you just need to go back and experiment with different dates and times to see if you can get some sunlight. And you can often achieve really good interior renderings just using natural daylighting without any artificial lights. So having got my light into the space, now I can go to the teapot button. So I've clicked OK to get out of my sun settings, and now you can see the little teapot down the bottom with the light bulb on it. It's also on the View tab. You can see the render button there with the teapot icon. Yep. And there's a preset in that render dialog. So once you've brought that up, just clicking on render, then you'll see under lighting you have the option for different schemes, and you can go to interior sun only. Go click render, and it's going to go through and render locally. In other words, rendering on this computer. And you're lucky, you've got pretty good computers here, so these will render much faster than the ones we had earlier. Yep. Okay, it's a shame. On the projector, the colours aren't as good as on the screen at the back here. So you can see there, that's often the case when you use different devices. Yeah, if you can see the sky, that's a good thing. Yeah. So, but that's right. You can always put that in, and then you'll need to just adjust the light. Okay, so it looks maybe a little dark. If you go then to adjust exposure, you can compensate for that. Okay, so I could also, while that's open, if I go to, show the model. Yeah, it does a lot of the work for you. So if I go for a later time, I can get more sun and then come back and render again. Ray trace is just a type of rendering. So yeah, so the option is this one here, Autodesk Ray Tracer. Oh, that's another type of rendering. Yeah, that's like a quick render, but it's not that quick, so it's not all that useful. Yeah. Yeah, you need to just get the sun settings to match. So it won't automatically detect or won't automatically set the sun settings the same way, but you can save them. So here we've got, I've just got this in session option, but you can choose any of these. So if you, I'll leave that on. So if you just click Save Settings down in the bottom right, then you can give your sun a name. And so sometimes it's good just to have a sun setting for rendering. So I'm going to call mine Render Sun 1. And that way I can leave those solstice and equinox options for later. And whenever I want to render with these settings, I can go into a different view and then just choose Render Sun 1, and it'll use the same sun. So well, I'll just show you a couple more options and then I'll give you some time to experiment with this. We'll do artificial lighting. So the last thing, before you can see everything in a view like this, you'll often need to adjust the exposure. And if you've done any photography, you probably have some experience with this. So when you take a photo inside, after taking it on a bright sunny day outside, it'll often be so dark that you can't see anything because the aperture will be set to not let in very much light. If you go the other way, if you take a photo from the inside looking towards the outside on a bright sunny day, sometimes it'll be so bright that you can't see anything because the aperture is often wide open to let in as much light as possible in a low light interior, and then the sunlight is going to come in and give you too much light. And so, do you know the other ways when you're working with a camera that you can adjust the exposure, as well as changing the aperture size, which is the thing that lets the light in? Exactly, shutter speed. So there's the speed of the opening, and then the film speed is the other one. So there are those three ways. Yeah. And so here, this does exactly the same thing. If you click on Adjust Exposure, you don't need to give those different values. You can just use this exposure value at the top. And it's very sensitive, so I'm just going to click and drag it a little bit to the left, and click Apply, and you can see now everything's brighter. The highlights there may be getting a bit too bright, so I can take those back down and make them darker. But at least I can see more in the background there. So if I then increase the quality, that will also give me more light in the background. So I'm going to go to medium, and you'll see it'll take longer, but it's going to look much better. Now, if you get a message like this telling you that you're missing image maps, don't worry about it for now. We'll spend some more time on materials and lighting after this. Okay, so you can see it's taking a bit longer, but it's still not too bad. And so notice how the lighting's much more balanced. And also those grainy textures are starting to be much higher quality. So the final thing I'll say there, when you're rendering textures like this, reflective textures particularly, it's actually the blurry reflections that create the most problems. And so you can see there, these are reflective images, also reflective surfaces, and they get these little speckle effects. And that's common with reflective materials, particularly when they're blurry. So I'm just going to show you a couple of little things about materials. If I select that wall there, edit type, edit the structure, and then browse so I can see the material. I'm just going to show you one little thing. If we go to the Appearance tab, you can see then that the, if we make this bigger, the texture is relatively smooth, but it does have some blurring, and that's due to this glossiness option. Okay, so if we increase that, that's going to actually make it smoother. So in other words, a smoother reflection. Now, some materials are also going to have a reflectivity option, and so the amount of the reflectivity also affects that effect that you can see. So I'm just going to reduce these a bit. There are two values there. We'll look at why you have two values for reflectivity maybe later as well. I'm just going to show you the difference now. So if I go and render again, so I'll show you the original. So that's my yellow plastic. And if I render again now, should also go a little bit faster. Maybe it'll be marginal, but it should make it a little bit faster, definitely. And then we should see a fairly noticeable difference in the texture. So again, it's like a lot of things, like the modelling actually as well. Sometimes it works best just to keep it simple, and when you try to do things that are complicated, like blurry reflections, they often don't look as good, and they take longer to render. So you can see now, this texture doesn't have as much graininess, that yellow plastic, as definitely as the black plastic does, because I've made that smoother. And so it's often a bit surprising to some people at first that a mirror is going to render faster and look better than a piece of plastic that isn't as reflective as a mirror. So a mirror is going to give you a perfectly smooth reflection, and that will often look the best. So again, on medium, it's looking much better, except that these grainy textures are still showing those speckles, again because of the blurring. That's an attempt at doing a blurred reflection, and it's only when you increase the quality even higher that it'll get rid of those. So I've got to go to high, for example, maybe to start seeing that be reduced in the black surface there. But it's going to slow it down even further. But that's the process. So you start with low quality. That should give you a fairly good idea of the way it's going to render, and then as you resolve some of the issues, you can increase the quality and start to work towards producing the final rendered image that you're going to keep. And so this model is still fairly simple, so even on high it'll render relatively quickly. If you've got more detail in your file, then it will of course take much longer to render, and on high, just to give you an idea, some of the student work I've seen in here would take maybe an hour just to render a single image on high because of the amount of detail they have there. Mine will finish in much less time than that, but I don't have as much detail. But that is another good reason for setting up the rendering early on, because then you can add more detail and have a pretty good idea how it's going to render without sitting around waiting for hours. The other option, so I'll come and have a look in a minute, but then the final thing I'll just say there is make sure you've got access to your Autodesk account, because all Autodesk programs, well virtually all of them, let you render in the cloud now. Yeah, I know it's tricky sometimes on some of the computers in here. It won't always work, but I'll show you that. And that's a great option because it does most of the work for you. You still need to set it up like this, but you can often just set it up on low quality and then send it off to render in the cloud, and it'll render in 10 minutes, something that would take sometimes hours on these computers, because they use their supercomputers in San Francisco. And so you can see here, much better quality already, but again in the cloud it would be better still. And it's actually an array of computers. They have thousands of computers there that they let you use for free as a student, and you just need to click render in cloud and it'll send it off to render it there, and you can log into a web browser to download them. So you can even send it to render from here, and then as long as you have access to Chrome or Firefox or whatever, you can just log in to their web page and download the rendered finished images. Having said that, you don't have to use the cloud. You can still get pretty good quality. So you can see here, even on high, which isn't, there's a higher setting than this, but even on high, it's starting to look okay. Yeah. So that speckled, that thing that looked like a grainy texture, is actually meant to be smooth plastic, but it needs to be rendered on high quality to get the blurring in the reflection. And also notice how those areas that looked really dark before are a bit more balanced. And you can even see it more clearly on the screen here, because that can show more colours than the projector can. Okay, so this is without even adding in lights. Once I add in artificial lights, then we'll get even more balance. But with sunlight, you can do quite a lot. So the very last thing, now I want to save that, and you've got two options down the bottom for that. You've got Save to Project, which will, like it says, save it in your project file. So I'm just going to keep the default name there, that's fine. And then the other option is Export. And Export, as you'd expect, exports the image to, in this case, one of these formats. You could use JPEG if you want to for preliminary renders, that's usually okay. But which one of those do you think is going to give you the best quality? Bitmap, yeah, TIFF definitely. PNG is a really interesting option as well though, so often I'll use PNG. Mainly because PNG's kind of like the new JPEG. It gives you all the advantages of a JPEG in terms of compression, but it's not going to give you the same loss of quality that a JPEG does. It uses a different algorithm. And also PNGs can store alpha channels, which means they can cut out the background automatically, and you can stick your own skies and other things in really easily. So PNG is a really useful format. Yeah, just save it somewhere you can get to. That's mainly if you want to work on it in Photoshop. No? Okay, yeah. So, oh no, yeah, but later on you might want to. So, okay, so now you can see my project browser. I've got this new category called renderings, and there I can find the rendering again. Yeah, I'll probably use PNG most of the time. So it's important to realise that the original perspective view doesn't keep the rendering. So that is a 3D view, and I can adjust things in there, I can move the camera, and I won't see the rendering. So to go and find the rendering, I've got to either have exported it, or in the project file, saved it to project, and then in the renderings category here, I'll have the rendered version, which of course won't change if I try to select something or anything there. It's just flat image. And that is what you'll put on sheets. So here, if I have a sheet with some space, I can place an image like that, and you can do it all within Revit if you don't want to use InDesign to do your layouts. That's why it's good to save it in the project. But if you're going to be working on it in Photoshop, and I'd encourage you to experiment with that, it's something you can do a lot with just experimentation. So I've got here the image I've just saved, which I'll open with Photoshop. And then on the image menu, adjustments, and say levels, and we can look at changing things like that. Lots of things you can do with levels and brightness and all those other things in Photoshop. Or my favourite, exposure. Okay, so, and you can of course stick in people. You can do this in Revit, but they look better sometimes if you do them in Photoshop. So going to the material folder here, I've got a folder with some people in it that you're welcome to use, and let's just get, there we go. That's, sorry, I thought that was higher res. I've got some higher res ones here. Here we go. I'm sick of using her, but she'll do. There we go. So it's as simple as Control A, Control C, go to your file, Control V. So that's Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and then now Control T to transform, and I can stretch and move. There we go. So she's a bit short, maybe. Not sure. Okay, it's starting to freeze up. Oh, and I'm using shift there, by the way, as I stretch, just to keep it in proportion. Okay, maybe we'll have a look at how you can do shadows and other things in Photoshop later, because yeah, it sounds like most of you haven't had your presentation subject, so we'll spend some time on that, because that's an important thing when you start doing more complex things with the rendering tools, which we're going to look at over the next few weeks, or next couple of weeks. It's good to know how to use Photoshop, both for the adjusting of the rendered images that I've just looked at, but also you'll see more and more as we start to go into materials, which I'm going to do afterwards, that many materials rely on the same kinds of images. So this timber image uses a PNG file. So I won't show you the file, but I'll just show you a picture of it there. So it's just a photo of some timber. And so you can go and adjust that in Photoshop or make your own and use that to create your textures as well. So you can use Photoshop hand in hand with the rendering. Okay, so anyhow, next I'll look at lighting and spend a bit more time on materials as well.